It's a great pleasure to have a chance to talk to my friend Kent Deng, who I've known for many years.
Yes.
Kent, when and where were you born?
I was born in Beijing in 1953 in the winter. And in fact, my parents were Southerners, and why I was born in Beijing was because their careers taking them from South China to North China. So I was born in Beijing in the very heart of the power center. When I was born, my father was in the, so to speak, Zhongnanhai, in the where the Central Military Commission was located. That's how I was related to the new regime of Maoism. Mm-hmm. So he was a ranked officer of the new government.
Well, I'm sure we'll come further on that.
Yes.
But I always ask about ancestors. I know yours go back beyond Confucius.
Yes.
But can you just pick out a few highlights of your ancestry?
Yeah. Apparently, on the record, the first ancestral figure was a prince from the Shang dynasty. The surname was Ji. Then he was granted a feed in a county called Deng.
What date was that?
That was 3,800 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He was a minor princess and rather unimportant one. And once he was granted the lord of that small kingdom, and he adopted the name of Deng. So this is the beginning of the Deng's clan. It was a very ancient clan of Chinese history, twice as old as the Confucius clan. So that bit of history is something my father always mentioned. We were once a prince of the first dynasty of China.
Whereabouts was this?
It was in Henan province, very close to the heartland of Chinese civilization in early days.
So Yellow River?
Yes, Yellow River, off the Yellow River. It is where the Yellow River, from that point, Yellow River started to go wrong. That's the lower reaches of the Yellow River.
Great. So, are there any other ancestors back down to, say, your grandparents that you would like to mention, or should we get on to your grandparents?
Yeah. My then clan, my Deng's clan, suffered a huge blow during the end of the Song dynasty, Northern Song dynasty, in the 12th century when the Mongols came. And they were, these people, the Deng's people, were forced to leave their home from Henan province near the Yellow River to escape as refugees southwards. And they reached a point in current day Hunan and the Guangdong province. Between these two provinces, they decide in a sort of a clan meeting. The decision was made that the future was so uncertain, the clan should split to two. One going to further south to Guangdong, the other one should go to west to Sichuan province. That's how the Deng's clan became two. right? So we have two sub-clans. One is still based in Guangdong, which was my great-grandfather's branch, and the other one was in Sichuan, where Deng Xiaoping came from.
Interesting. So, leaping on from the Northern Song, what's the next landmark in your family history?
My next landmark was my great-grandfather living in Foshan, Guangdong province. He was a entrepreneur, a petty entrepreneur. From the family record, he went to Indonesia to earn some money and then buy a wife, so to speak. And my grandfather followed suit. He went to the Philippines to earn some money and then come back to buy a wife. And then, as you know, the family stories goes, situation in Guangdong wasn't terribly prosperous. He then moved to the Yangtze River, the lower Yangtze. He resettled himself in Zhenjiang between Shanghai and Nanjing, where the best silk was produced at that time. We're talking about 1910s and 20s until the 30s, until the Japanese invasion. He established himself as a realist agent and also a comprador for silk trade. He spoke some German. He bought silk from that region, the best silk in China, and then resold silk to Qingdao, where the Germans were based. So he sort of arbitraged between locations and between different economies. He had a very comfortable life. We know he had a 3-story large house, and one side of the house was basically covered with old glass windows. In old days, glasses were very expensive. For someone who can have a large house, 3 stories with a lot of glasses, basically means he's wealthy. And also, he managed the whole street as a real estate agent. And
Is that a real estate agent?
Yeah, real estate agent. And he actually had some properties as well. And also, he actually owned a theater, Peking Opera. So my father was an amateur Peking Opera singer, because as a young master, he get free ticket every night in that theater in Zhenjiang during the 2030s. So my father's generation, basically until the Japanese, knew nothing about poverty. They have very comfortable sort of upper middle class upbringing. They have a piano. They have new magazines. They have a lot of records of Western music and also Peking opera. They in their hundreds. And so my father majored English and economics in university.
Which university?
It's called Jinan University. Now still kicking. Jinan University is in Guangdong province.
What happened when the Japanese came?
The Japanese came on their way from Shanghai. The Japanese marched all the way from Shanghai to Nanjing, and on the way they attacked Zhenjiang. They destroyed the whole streets of
1936, is it?
37, 38. They made a very swift attack on the river. And my father told me when the Japanese left, the whole sort of a block of streets were destroyed by fire. The Japanese just burned all the streets down, and the only thing he can recognize from the 3-story house, large house, was his the barrel of his BB gun. So it's completely destroyed, and the family were forced to, all the members were forced to hide themselves in rural China. They mentioned the island, sort of a river island, somewhere in Jiangsu province, where the Japanese didn't take enough interest. So they hired there for 3 years, and by which time my grandfather basically used up all his hard-earned cash. So the family basically went bankrupt because of the Japanese.
They were on their way to the terrible massacres in Nanjing. Did your father know about those when they happened, or only later?
Only later. They knew the Japanese captured Nanjing as planned, and because of that, the family decided to join the resistance. Yeah, so
which did they join? The Kuomintang, or
the family split into two. Typically, half of my father's siblings joined the Republic movement, and half joined the communists. So my father, you can bet which part. he joined the communist. He joined the Xinsi, which is the new Fourth Army. He joined in Fujian province because you have the communist movement. Basically run 2 branches. One is in the South China, which is in Fujian, by the group of New Fourth Army, headed by Chen Yi. Yeah, and then the northern part was headed by people like Mao Zedong and Liu Shaoqi. So my father was in the south part of the movement.
Was he on the Long March, or?
No, he was not on a long march. The northern part, the Yan'an group, was on a long march. So my father was sort of a leftover of the communists. So they start from guerrilla warfare before they get recognized by Chiang Kaishek during this United Front movement against the Japanese. So.
And then what happened? I mean, for 1947, 48, Chiang Kaishek is driven off and so on.
Yeah. After the unexpected victory against the Japanese, all of a sudden the surrender of Japanese basically sent a message to all parties in China: it's time to grab your territory. And my father involved in civil war against the Republican troops. He was involved in Huaihai Zhanyi, which is the second largest campaign launched by Mao and his strategists to grab territory in Lower Yangtze, and they did it. After that, Chiang Kai-shek escaped from mainland to Taiwan. Yeah. He didn't know then his brother and his sister went with Chiang to Taiwan Air Force. So, including his own mother, my grandmother, they all ended in Taipei. So, incredible. So they lost contact with each other until 1955.
So then, well, you take the story on from there. What happens in the early years of Mao and the Communist Party? Apparently,
someone told my father, your mother and half the family now in Taipei, they were Republicans. So being a good officer of the Mao's army, he reported to his superior saying, I have to report, with all my honesty, half of my family, including my mother, now is our enemy or enemies. And he was promptly removed from Zhongnanhai in 1955, and he was asked to surrender his pistol, which was the symbol of his power. If I can work it out, because there's no proper rank of his position, but he should be a colonel by the time he surrendered his weapon, and he was asked to leave the military and become sort of a civil servant. So that's the end of his basically career. Yeah.
And you'd been born by then?
I was born, I was two years old.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your mother. You say had he gone to earn this money and then come back, and it was an arranged marriage, was it? Or
my grandmother.
Your grandmother was an arranged marriage.
Yeah, my grandpa, the one who visited, made his money in the Philippines and then migrate from Canton or from Foshan, Guangdong to the Lower Yangtze. He married twice. His first marriage was in the village. Then he had a son. Then he migrated to the Lower Yangtze, and he married again because his first wife died of some sort of disease, left him with one son. So my own father was his second marriage, eldest son, and he had how many children? 3 sons and 3 daughters, 6. Yeah, and so this is quite a big family. But he also had one son from his first marriage. So altogether 7.
Yeah.
And now he died in 1940. Died of basically poverty, and I think he suffered from cancer, stomach cancer. And the whole family basically scattered in all directions. Half joined the communist movement, half joined the Republican movement, and the last place when the family still was in one piece was that rural island. Then they decided we have to go, otherwise we can't survive. And my mother is equally interesting. She was the 3rd generation overseas Chinese. She was born in the Philippines, in Manila. And equally interesting, she joined the resistance movement in the Philippines against the Japanese when she was about 14. He joined the Filipino Communist Party when she was 15, only a teenager. And she was then selected. She was a messenger, a communist messenger against the Japanese. And she was then selected by the party to do a degree or to do some training in Hong Kong in a spy school. Yeah, run by Zhou Enlai and Dong Biu, these 2 very important Chinese communist leaders. So she spent a year and a half, I believe, in Hong Kong, doing all sorts of special agent 007 stuff. Surely she can shoot. She can send Morse codes, and she would do all sorts of professional spy would do. We have photos. They're all young girls, very pretty, and act terribly modern. And us at the point when she was sent back to the Philippines to do more, special agent work, the Chinese Communist Party won their struggle. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This shouldn't happen. I should switch it off. No, it's permanent. Shall we continue?
Yes. So the communists won the struggle in what year was that?
1948.
Yeah.
1948. Chairman Mao declared total victory in 1949, but the whole situation became very clear.
I see. In mainland. What about in the Philippines? She was still in the Philippines.
No, she was in Hong Kong. She was chosen to do the special course a year and a half in Hong Kong. The college was called the Dada College. And she was qualified as the special agent. As she was sent, she was to send back to the Philippines. All of a sudden, most part of mainland China was under the control of the Mao's troops. So then she got a order to go to Beijing instead of Manila, where she met my father, fell in love, and they got married, and they produced me.
Right. So she was a remarkable person. She's died, presumably.
Both my parents passed away.
Tell me something about their character and how it might have influenced you.
Yeah. My mother first. She was a very quiet person. She observed everything as a special agent should be. Very cautious about her words. Beautiful handwriting, either in English or Spanish or Chinese. Remember, you must be multilingual to operate in Southeast Asia. And she was the only one left her own family, joined the resistance movement, and then went to Hong Kong, and then returned, so to speak, China. If you see her, she would stand out in the crowd because she would sit properly, always like a lady. She wouldn't really make unnecessary noise, and she was always in the background, watching. But she was I have to say, very good mother, and she gave me a lot of support. And she was the one saying, if you can stay in the West, do that. So she said, I'm the only one, return home, and I'm the poorest in the family. That says something about eventually the revelation in later years of her life suggests that she probably regretted
being a communist.
Regret being, unable to do
come back.
her duty as a daughter, whatever. And during her stay in mainland China, her parents passed away, and she couldn't actually go back for the funerals. Something, she...
Where were they? Where were her parents?
All the families, the family members were in the Philippines and the United States. Yeah, she was the only one left, the Philippines for China. My father, he was never a civilian. You will see, he had that sort of attitude as a sort of a dashing officer at one time. He was a very demanding father, put it this way, asking myself and my younger sister, what to do, and you can't argue with him. So naturally, I feel much closer to my mother than my father, because he was a very demanding person. He said, if we don't have a cultural revolution, I would send you to a military academy and train you as a soldier. So that's what he wanted.
So let's now move on to you. You're born 1953, and you stay in Beijing for how long?
I left Beijing at the end of 1983.
So you stay all the time?
Yeah, basically. I spent a lot of time during the Cultural Revolution in Heilongjiang when I was a teenager. From 1969 to 1975, I was in Keshan, a sort of a state-run farm.
Was your family sent out, or you were sent out?
I was sent out as Mao decided that youngsters, urban youngsters, should go to rural China to get themselves re-educated. I was not alone, of course. There have been a lot of recollections of young people like myself, once young, during that time. There were about 12 million urban young Chinese were sent out to countryside to get a re-education. The problem for me was that not only I was sent out for 6 years, my father was sent to training centers for problem civil servants for 9 years. My mother was sent to another camp for 4 years, and so within one family we went in 3 directions. So my younger sister, she was looked after by an aunt. So the whole family was actually pulled apart during the crazy years of Cultural Revolution.
Was your father and mother, they were considered to be problems, and that's why they were sent out?
Correct.
Do you know what the nature of the problem was?
My father's problem was because his close relatives in Taipei, so which is considered very suspicious, especially sister and the brother and your mother even, and the Air Force. I have to say, the Chinese mainland investigators certainly know really well, what the half the family were doing in Taipei. My uncle, my father's younger brother, was a Air Force general who became the vice minister of defense before retired. So he was truly very important in Taiwan, and so for that reason, on that reason alone, my father was considered not trustworthy. My mother, though, was slightly different. She had a very clear record being underground member of the communist movement, recruited by the top leadership of Chinese Communist Party,
Mm.
trained a special agent in Hong Kong, sent to mainland. However, because of the marriage and also because her overseas identity,
Mm.
she was considered not dangerous, but certainly not one of us.
Mhm.
So she was sent to a different camp for 4 years. So if we put the families, in the camp together, 9 years for my father, 6 years for myself, 4 years for my mother, 19 years together. That's a lot of years. Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
What? Well, let's come back to it. But earlier than that, before the Cultural Revolution, you have the Great Leap Forward, and that's when you're very young. You're
Yes.
only 5, 6. Do you have any memories of that?
I didn't suffer, I have to say,
Mm.
because my parents sent me to a elite school called Yuying School,
Mm.
which was open to privileged families, and it's modeled after a military cadet
Mm.
or academy of Soviet Union, and we spent. It's a boarding school. Imagine it's a boarding school. There are only about 5 in Beijing, and ours is the best, so to speak, run by the Central Party Committee, for that matter. And all the kids were from good families, so to speak. So we spent 6 days a week in the school, and only 1 day you're allowed to visit your parents. Then you will be sent back to the school with shadow bus. So I didn't suffer. I didn't know the firemen, as if nothing happened. We had certainly proper meals and clothing, and we were comfortable. And so I should condemn the system to treat us differently.
On that schooling, I mean, you were there until you were about 16. Were you getting particularly interested in any academic or other subjects when you were at school?
When I was younger, I was around 10. I think I would be an engineer. I think I clearly humanities or history are something I don't do well. I was good at mathematics and physics. Maybe a doctor, maybe a mathematician, maybe officer of Chinese army, especially sort of a high-tech sort of a division of the army. That's what I thought I would be. But the Cultural Revolution changed everything. I started to think about our own destiny, so to speak. Why we were sent from basically heaven to hell. Remember, I was a privileged kid, leaving a boarding school, knowing nothing about outside world, eating properly, sleeping properly. We have a zoo inside the large compound of the school. We have peacocks, we have a tiger, we have a fox, we have rabbits, we have all sorts of exotic birds, and and all of a sudden we were sent, we were kicked out of this privileged life to Siberia, Chinese Siberia, where the temperature was so harsh. It can be 30 degrees below zero, and we start from a stable. We don't have a proper housing, so we build everything with our own hands. So I start to think, why? So that's how I make a quite sharp turn to read history. So that changed my life from that moment. So I have to say the 6 year rather hard life in Heilongjiang, the Chinese Siberia, changed my view about China's destiny, China's culture, myself, my family, and everything else.
You were basically doing agricultural work, were you?
Yes.
Mm.
For the first 4 years, I basically tilled the land. I changed my view about agriculture. I think it's a great sort of occupation because you feed yourself. You don't need anybody else. Yeah, that's very, very important. In the second exile, if you like,
yeah,
in Heilongjiang, I became a part-time teacher of the local primary school, simply because I can read and I can write. Why they decide to hire me part-time as a school teacher? Simply because they don't have anybody else available. So I volunteered. So I have some sort of local kids, and I think also perhaps I spoke fluent standard Chinese. So this was important then. And I taught all age group the same subject or subjects, mathematics and some basic Chinese literature, basic characters, Chinese characters, part-time for 2 years before I got opportunity to return to Beijing.
By which time you were about 22?
22, yes.
Yeah. So what happened when you returned?
When I returned, I was permitted to resume my education. So I have two choices: either to learn English or politics. I want to learn English because my father had a double degree of English and economics, and by the time I returned to Beijing, I have been told your application for, I passed everything. They did offer me an interview. They said you're fine. But I have been replaced by somebody from more influential family. Imagine that. So the only option left for me was politics. So I regrettably I took that opportunity. Going back to Beijing means a lot to me. I didn't want to stay on for another 6 years, so quickly I went.
Which university was it?
It's called Beijing Capital Normal University.
And this is an undergraduate?
It is an undergraduate.
Tell me something about that. Was it good and helpful?
It was a 3-year sort of quite intensive education. Remember, I didn't have a proper secondary education.
Yeah.
All my education was interrupted by the Cultural Revolution. I taught myself. I mean, I had to actually take a test before I was permitted to go on with my tertiary. So all the subjects, Chinese language, history, some English, chemistry, physics, mathematics, I actually taught myself. I remember I have a little diesel oil lamp, and at night, 20 people share the same room, and we sleep on a northern Chinese Kang, which is a break
Yes.
bed. So I negotiated with my fellow inmates. I took a side, at the end of the Kang, so I wouldn't disturb anybody else. At that corner, I would spend about 2 hours reading something. So I have a diesel lamp. Every morning, they know I was working last night because my nose become black. Yeah, every night. So 6 years, I would say I was, most of the nights I would spend 2 hours reading something.
Where did you get the materials for your education?
I basically asked the tractor driver to give me something, which is okay. If you say, I need some oil for my lamp.
I mean the materials.
Oh, the education. My family, my parents bought some. This is still allowed. Sort of apolitical subjects. You can buy those things in all the Chinese bookshops. Still. Yeah. So long as they're not terribly political. So I get even some newspapers sending from Beijing or various parts of China to me, because myself I have no other resources, and I depend on people from cities to send me things. Yeah.
So at the end of the 3-year, I presume it's 3-year undergraduate degree, what did you do then?
I became a tutor for about 3 years, during which time Deng Xiaoping was reinstated as the leader of Chinese Communist Party and the government. So he decided formally education should be resumed, and civil servants and all the normal social mobility channels should be resumed. And then universities start to recruit not only undergrads but also postgrads. So I managed to pass national examinations to become a postgrad or master's student of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which was the highest in China.
That was a 2-year course?
Yes, it was a 3-year course.
3-year course, masters in what subject?
Oddly, Das Kapital. You can imagine, yeah.
I can imagine.
You can imagine, yeah.
Boring.
Yeah. So, in that sense, I still know from from volume 1 to volume 3 what Marx wanted to say. Das Kapital.
Well, 3 years of that. Did anything else eventful happen during those 3 years? This is actually the Gang of Four and the end of.
Yes, correct.
Chairman Mao.
Yeah. Towards the end of my study, I feel that I need either German or English, simply because the subject, I feel each time I have to read Chinese translation, which wasn't very accurate, So then I enrolled in English courses, and first of all, courses taught by Chinese, then courses taught, as I made progress, taught by foreigners, Westerners, and I met a couple from Australia, and through them I start to contact Eric Jones. That's changed my life. So La Trobe University, Melbourne offered me a place. So
how old were you then, when you were offered a place?
I was 30.
30?
Yes.
So you did the tutoring for quite a few years.
Yes.
So at the age of 30 you were offered a place at La Trobe.
Yes.
And you mentioned our mutual hero, Eric Jones,
Yes.
the European miracle and so on. Tell me something, I mean, we're anticipating your time in Australia, but tell me something about your relationship with Eric Jones.
Yeah. Eric was a remarkable person. He decided to know Asia, and then the best way for him, he told me this, is to recruit a few Chinese students. Indeed, he recruited 3 of us in the space of 3 years. I was the first one. Then after me, another one, and then thereafter another one. 3 of us. I'm the only one, I think, stay in the West. One didn't finish. One went to Hong Kong. Yeah. And our utility, if you like, for Eric was to basically show him what China was made of. Yeah, all spectrum of life and politics, population, culture, and we often have this sort of a quiet, private conversation. In what situation, how the Chinese behave, that kind of a conversation. So the training was Oxbridge, of course. I remember he asked me to read a book every 3 to 5 days and give him the report. I was terrible. I started from 1 page, and move on to 3, 5 pages. I couldn't finish reading, say, 20 pages of paper on time. Then I can finish the whole book in a week. So he certainly pushed me to my personal limit, and in that way, he really showed me how to become a good scholar.
Was this a PhD, or was it? Were you a teacher, or what?
It's a 1+3 program. So I start from.
So it was a PhD.
Yeah, MPhil for 1 year, and then 3-year PhD.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he was effectively your supervisor for a PhD.
He was my supervisor and a mentor, and I really am completely sort of in debt to his kindness and his support. And he taught me how to be a scholar and how to be a person. He famously he said, I quote, "Do you really trust your government?" Meaning Chinese government. He said, "I don't even trust mine." So, yeah, that really got me.
His was Australian, the Australian government, was it?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Was he Australian? I didn't know that.
I think he was Australian permanent resident, but not Australian national.
Where was he
always
from?
had a UK passport.
Ah, he was UK.
Yes.
I'm always interested in people's working methods. Did you get any idea? Because he was such a polymath and wide thinker. Did you ever see how he worked, or have any impression of how he read or took notes or actually wrote?
Yeah. In his office and also at his home, he will have cartons of cards, and he would write down everything he feels important, be it a passage or be it a title of an article or title of a book. How many cards? I would think in the sort of neighborhood of 100,000.
Wow.
Loads and loads of cards. And when he wrote start to write a book, he would have cards first, and then line up cards. That's how he worked. Yeah.
Do you know he must have had them divided into subjects?
Yes. I think he had a system and multiple cards. For example, the same content will be multiplied so that he can organize his thought.
How did he multiply it?
I think he would copy the same card 3 times and put it in a different context.
He didn't photocopy it or anything.
No,
Wrote everything.
he had most sort of a distinguished way of writing everything. His handwriting is so clear.
What has happened to his 100,000 cards?
I have no idea. You got me. I have no idea.
And did he write every day, or
he writes basically every day? He has 2 sort of lines of writing. One is global history. The other one is Birdwatching. He was the secretary of Birdwatching club in Australia. He basically run the club and sending sort of a monthly reports. What sort of birds his members come across. What should they do about it? So that's his hobby. So at the weekends he would drive somewhere with his binoculars to watch birds and take notes. Interesting man.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
He was married.
He was married.
Nice wife.
Yes.
And you felt part of their family to a certain extent.
Yes or no? He decides his professional life and the family life should be different. And his wife is normally not part of this professional sort of a context. Later on, his wife actually helped me to, in a way of editing my book. When I, joined LSE, I think I need someone who understands me. Who can also have native speaker to polish my book. By which time the family returned to the UK. He retired, and his wife basically was available as an editor. By the way, his wife always edited his book, and also as his first line of protection but checking. So I know that well or enough to think I will be in very safe hand. Yeah.
While you were there, did you meet any other either teachers or your fellow students who you particularly were influenced by or would like to talk about?
Yeah, the man I met in Australia was Mark Elvin.
Mark Elvin?
Yes, Mark Elvin.
Was he at the same university? Or?
No, he was at ANU,
yeah.
And I traveled regularly from Melbourne to Canberra to meet him. In the beginning, I want to borrow books from his library. And then I became quite close to him in terms of we were both interested in Chinese history and Chinese economic growth, and at that time we had a very small group at the ANU of Chinese growth development. I was part of that to the extent that people often thought he was my PhD supervisor. So I owe him much.
He's about 10 years older than you, isn't he? Probably.
More than 10 years old.
10
15 years old.
Yeah.
He's now 80 now.
Is he? Yes, he would be.
Yeah.
Tell me something about Mark. I've interviewed Mark and I've known him for many years as well. And he's a very important, interesting man. Have you any impressions or memories of?
He's more talkative than Eric Jones, for certain, and he's very knowledgeable. I think there's a button. Once you push that button, he won't stop. The button is the understanding of Chinese history, and he will say, "This is my understanding. and you're probably wrong. So that button, when you push it every single time, he won't stop talking. He will say, he read whose work and how this man's work has been misunderstood by who, and now he will get right about the wrongs, and he's very interesting a man in terms of a knowledge of Chinese history. He told him once, because I decided to take on Chinese history, I actually spend more time and get less returns if I actually decided to do Latin or any European language or any European history. So in that sense, he recognized just how tough this subject matter really becomes. It's very difficult. The more you learn, the less you know. So this is not right? It's not right. Yeah.
I mean, his most generally well-known book is A Pattern of the Chinese Past, and that was published around this time, I imagine. But I think it was about 79, something like that. And you must know the book quite well, with its famous central argument. Would you like to comment on the book at all?
Yeah. Mark's book certainly marks a turning point, with which the early versions of Chinese history were all challenged by his new view. His new view is this: China was not poor. China was just not flexible enough. So his high-level equilibrium trap captures, in such a sort of a magical or sort of a ingenious way to say, all the Eurocentric view about China misinterpret Chinese achievements. So it's we shouldn't judge China with European benchmark of industrialization, modernization, urbanization, or all that, or even English individualism, if you like, all these benchmarks. Rather, we should judge China with sort of ordinary people's material life. So that is really revolutionary. So I can see the link between Marx's high-level equilibrium trap and Kenneth Pomerantz's great divergence. There's a quite close link between the two, although they are 30 years apart. So to speak, this, if you like, undercurrent of viewing China differently goes on even today.
So, how long were you at Monash?
La Trobe.
4
years.
4 years.
Yeah.
For the PhD, and you got your PhD.
Yeah, I got PhD on time.
What was the subject?
The subject is the social value and the function of the Chinese literati in technical history of China. A subject I happen to exploit after 1 year of waste of my time. I studied my PhD topic with merchants and the trade, long distance trade. And after reading one article after another, one book after another, I think I have nothing to say. So I moved, by sheer chance, I come across a lot of agricultural treatises done by Chinese literati, so to speak. Then I realized these works were terribly important in the keeping up with China's best practice in farming. And the realization actually was the Yuan-Mongol period. The Yuan-Mongol period lasted about 80 years, but they produced more book in per capita terms during that period, as if the Chinese did not know how to farm. Why? So that's what intrigued me. So then I traced back 1,000 years and then back forward for another 500 years. So I did about 500 odd Chinese agricultural books done by this group, the Chinese literati, and realized there's a pattern. In the beginning, they introduced dry farming technology among their peers. Of course, with their peers, ordinary Chinese farmers in their villages. And then around Tang Dynasty, they introduced paddy farming. And during the Mongol period, they introduced both back to society. Why? Because the Mongols killed too many Chinese. In some regions, 80% of Chinese were slaughtered by the Mongols. So that's how devastating the Mongols caused economically and also demographically to the economy, to the point that they have to introduce farming technology from basically Central Asia back to the economy. But who did that? Those books, Chinese literati members. So I think this is the moment of my sense of belonging and also my sense of a contribution. My dissertation won a major prize in the Association of Economic History of the World in 1990, 2 years after I graduated. So that was a double insurance of what I've been doing was right. So I was, on the moon, basically. Yeah.
So what happened at the end of the 4 years? You'd done your dissertation. Did you move on to?
Yeah, I had sort of on and off teaching jobs, mainly in pure economics. I taught macro and microeconomics for 4 years during and after my PhD years. Then I got job offer in Adelaide. Flinders University offered me a 3-year contract, fixed contract, to teach economic history. So that's the moment I realized actually there's a market. I thought I would become an economist instead of economic historian for the rest of my life, simply because I can't find a job, which is quite normal to find a niche for yourself. During which period I got offer from Wellington, New Zealand, University of Wellington. It's called Victoria University of Wellington, where I got my tenure, and also I got my promotion as a senior lecturer. So I was very comfortable, very good wage, and
Did you like New Zealand?
I certainly did. I thought this is my place until my retirement. And out of blue, a fellow PhD sent me an advertisement from London saying, we are looking for someone who knows something about China. I sent my...
this was the LSE?
This is LSE. I sent my application in, which was 1 week after the deadline. I thought I'd just give it a try. I have nothing to lose. If I decide I'm not qualified, I'm not qualified. But they sent me a letter during those days we don't even use email. Certainly not
what date is it? Early 90s?
Yeah, 1994.
Yeah.
Yeah, 94. I remembered. And then 3 months later, they say, you have got an interview. So basically, to my surprise, I traveled 34 hours, flying 34 hours via Singapore to Wellington. From Wellington to Singapore, from Singapore to London. I landed. I got my dates wrong simply because because of the change of date, and I reached my hotel. They say in 2 hours' time, you'll be interviewed. I thought I have another day, so so I turned up telling a panel of 12 people. I said, if I did anything silly, forgive me. I only landed after 34 hours flight. And so they say, you have an interview of half an hour, and then you have 40 minutes sort of a seminar. You give us a research seminar. And I survived. At the end of the day, the panel decided we will offer you this job. Please think about it. That was the history.
That was a lectureship in.
It is they say unfortunately we can't give you senior lectureship. You have to start from from scratch. Well, that's the price you have to pay, right? So I said yes. Yeah, certainly. I will join LSE.
Was Patrick O'Brien on their panel?
No. I hope he did.
But you came to work closely with Patrick later. I mean, you co-published articles and probably ran the World History project with him. So it might be worth pausing on Patrick, who also is a very old friend.
Yes.
And any reflections or anecdotes about Patrick would be very nice.
Mark Alvin was one of my referees for the job. The second one was Raymond Myers. Both are well known. And once I told Mark I got this job, he then said, I will write to Patrick O'Brien, an old friend of mine, and you get contact with him. And the second person he introduced me to was Pierre Tien Will in Paris. I got reply almost immediately from Patrick, but I never get an answer or reply from Pierre Tien. So this is really separate the British and the French attitudes. And within 3 months, Patrick called me in to his research institute, historical research institute, and I remember in his office we had just like that a sandwich for lunch. That's how we start to know each other. So basically, at the very beginning of my career at LSE, through Mark Alvin, I started to know Patrick. He has been a great support of what I'm doing, and through that support, I started to know the British side of global history. If you like, a circle, including yourself. Remember
Jerry Martin's seminars?
Yes. Yeah.
And he was a friend of Jerry's as well.
As well, yes.
I wondered what you have written at least half a dozen articles and things together. How do you complement? How do you work together? And how does your work, knowledge and skills complement each other? I mean, his background is in French economic history and then British Industrial Revolution, and later more global, and yours is in Chinese. How did you work together?
Yeah. What actually made us click has been the role of the state. We both realized there's something quite remarkable in the growth and development in the West, and also the growth or lack of growth and development in China, which was the role of the state. Increasingly, we realize, other things being equal, the state or the role of state separate these two civilizations from each other. In the Chinese case, the state establish a alliance with the peasantry. Then through that route you have a persistent or perpetual physiocracy, protecting agriculture at all costs. Whereas in Britain or in Western Europe, you have the tendency of mercantilism through the sort of alliance between the state and the merchant class and the artisan class and then the bourgeoisie. So this is really where the money really was. While in China, where the land was, will be the interest of the state. In the West, it was the other way. It was where the money, the cash, where the wealth, real wealth is, bankable wealth was. So that's the early sort of if you like, sort of a channel of communication started. Then through the years, over 20 years, when we sort of collaborate in projects, this is the background of our sort of a mutual understanding. State separate us. Yeah.
Yes, I was very struck when Patrick said that the British state, rather than being weakened and its tax revenues being very small, was taxed very effectively and very heavily, much more than the French state.
Yeah.
And this was one of the secrets of its strength.
Yes. The Chinese state
couldn't get any taxes.
Yeah.
That was its weakness.
Until the Qing dynasty, the state simply decided to withdraw from governing. Yeah, it's a voluntary withdrawal from its duty. So I call it withering state. In that sense, China led the world in basically abandoning the state, like what Karl Marx suggests we all should do. Yes.
Interesting. I've just been reading, I should have read before, but Fairbanks was very enthusiastic about him, a French historian of China, Balatz.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating, very good, and he's particularly strong on the Mandarin Confucian literati and their negative role in Chinese economic history, their conservatism and so on. Did you use his work at all?
Yes. I certainly cite his work on occasions. The term conservatism is a very Eurocentric view or judgment towards the Chinese literati. If you look at their role of keeping the empire in one piece and also make society tranquil, they certainly did their job. China's system, unlike Western Europe, was not feudal. It was through the literatis' contribution of being the balance or balancer in all interest groups, plus the literati regularly support the state bureaucracy through their individual members joining the bureaucracy, play a central role. Also remember, farming is by far the most sustainable practice of economic activity so far. So in that sense, keeping the economy going, keeping the empire peaceful, should be enough to justify their doing in history. But if you judge China by the European standard, it was certainly not progressing enough. It was a sort of an economy of sort of a smithing growth type instead of Schumpeterian growth type. It is a largely closed economy. Farming will be the main occupation of the population. Food is important. Trade wasn't very important. So if you have all these conditions set up, I think China did quite a good job. So depending on how who you took with, so that's my.
So earlier on you showed or suggested the continuity between Mark Elvin's view and Pomerantz's view. I wondered whether you'd like to comment on the California school in Wong and Pomerantz, because you've also written quite a lot about economic Yangtze and other developments.
California school being Wong and Pomerantz, who I know for about 20 years, they waged a war against Eurocentrism.
So they wage a war against your former teacher?
Yes, and against my early belief.
And Jones?
Yes, indeed. Remember, I started my career by studying Das Kapital. I was completely convinced the European way must be the only way, and China didn't have a space in human history. But gradually I changed through my own research and also my readings of others' works. Now, California school didn't happen overnight. It was a sort of a time bomb, if you like, waiting to happen, simply because if you take the basic quantitative measures in our history, you just wouldn't add it up. For example, India and China once counted for about 60 to 70% of total humanity in the old world, were considered exceptions. I think they're not. These two societies were not exceptions, but they were the mainstream. So the basic, mathematics tells us something the European judgment cannot be right. Plus, as I teach developmental courses, I realize among all Western European societies, Britain was exceptional. Other societies, although they share a lot of similarities, such as Protestant ethics and science revolution, military revolution, navigation revolution, so on and so forth. Why and how only Britain managed to have industrial revolution? It seems to me our humanity hit jackpot only occasionally. It's not guaranteed. So Britain was lucky. It was not the norm. The norm rather should be in the East. So that's how I view the rise of the great divergence debate, because they get the basic quantities right. China and India put together were the Smithian norm globally. Then we need to explain this. So this is the moment, eureka moment, for all economic historians. Of course, now the California school has been attacked, criticized by different voices. But even so, nobody can change the basic fact that majority people living in Asia doing something the Europeans sort of normally do not agree with, do not appreciate. So that's my understanding. Therefore, I certainly followed all the arguments and debate surrounding the great divergence issues. And do I agree with Pomerantz and Bin Wang? Yes or no? From the view that Asia was the norm and Western Europe was a freak, I quote Pomerantz. Certainly, yes, but in terms of their methodologies, in terms of their interpretations of Asia, I do not necessarily agree with them. For example, was the lack of coal and the colonies responsible for China's underdevelopment? That was certainly not proven to be the case. For example, in Yellow River region, we have basically coal deposits everywhere, every province, if not every county. So you can't say China is a lack of coal or cheap fuel. And secondly, colonies, do we count Manchuria a colony, or do we count Taiwan a colony? If we do, China certainly actually made effort to conquer non-Chinese lands. So it's a matter of time. Also, remember, we have a lot of overseas Chinese. My mother's family included. They certainly live outside China for 3 generations. They were sort of unofficial colonies in Southeast Asia. So in that sense, I would take a pinch of salt with Pomerantz. In terms of Bin Wang, I agree even less with him, because Bin's interpretation of a Chinese state is too idealistic, and the behavior he portrays is something I cannot recognize. Very clean, efficient state, and also it runs a welfare state, looking after every single citizen. That's certainly not what the Qing state would do. Rather, Qing state did very little towards social welfare, even national security. The Qing state gave up ruling China, which was disastrous.
Right. Well, I've got 2 more big, largish questions still to ask. One is about your own work. If you had to single out what you think your major contributions to our understanding of China have been, selecting a book or an article, what would you choose?
My book. That has to be my 1999 book, The Political Economy of Pre-Modern China, in which I trying to establish a system to link all key factors together. The philosophy behind it is not historical materialism, is not liberalism, is not classical neoclassical economics. or Max Weber. It is the Chinese. It's called 天人合一, the heaven and human society working side by side or working together, because the Chinese state needed a heaven to get its mandate, yeah, and the general public, including all the bureaucrats and also the head of state, was subject to the rule of that heaven. The heaven controls all the secrets of human desire, human relations, and every time, unlike the absolute monarchy in Europe, even the emperor will show its modesty and show its what do you call it in English?
Humility. Yeah.
Humility, to consult with heaven to see whether he's still okay to rule China. The problem really is this: heaven won't answer directly to the emperor. The heaven will send signs, natural, signs such as natural disaster, drought, flood, tsunamis, earthquakes, diseases, to actually tell the emperor, yes, you are doing something quite wrong. And the interpretation of the behavior of heaven was the privilege of the literati. So in that sense, actually, who controls the Chinese state, the head of state? It was not heaven, it was the literati collectively. So it's a very clever sort of a relationship. Also, unlike European sort of a system where you have a dialogue with God and you have a Bible to follow, and the Chinese didn't have a Bible as such, but collectively the literati, through the thing called heaven, indirectly control the monarch. So this is a very, very clever system, because it's so elastic and so malleable and so, and so convincing as well. Yeah, nothing is written down, but everything is open for people to interpret. Yeah. So this way, the most powerful emperor on earth has been checked by the will of the literati. So this is really the Chinese introduction. Basically, it is the Confucius idea and the Taoist idea of Tian, heaven. Is so important in the Chinese system to keep the system working and keep the system on balance. So every time you have earthquake, immediately the emperor will criticize himself. I did something wrong, and things will be changed. He will promise to his bureaucracy and his people. And I think what happened after 1949 was that heaven, under the control of the literati, was removed and replaced by Marxism. And the Marxism has far more sort of a clear written rules. And then the literati lost the space of manipulating the will of heaven. Yeah, so that actually caused a lot of trouble. And because now all of a sudden Mao can have a dialogue with Marxism or the heaven directly, bypassing all his literati. You shouldn't do that. You know? So by bypassing his literati, Mao really become a European absolute monarch. Yeah, that was certainly not desirable. Make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I want to talk more about it after we've finished. Fascinating. And then the last sort of question. When you were, let's say 1976, if anyone had said China in 40 years will be second largest economy in the world, will have more high-speed trains than the rest of the world put together, etc., etc. In other words, the China we see now. People would have said, you're completely mad, absolutely mad. You look at the growth rate of China through the Maoist period and before, no sign of this. So, as you know, the biggest puzzle now, the first big puzzle was E.L. Jones's, why did the West take off? Second big puzzle now is why China took off. So, in a few pithy words, why did China take off and how has it been so successful?
China's takeoff need to be understood in two parts. The first part was China's recovery. You know, China redeemed itself in the past 40 years. I think that at least first 10 years will be the time to redeem what the damage caused by Mao's mismanagement. So that shouldn't be counted as growth. It is just the recovery type. And then after that, we have 30 years of quite fast growth, 8% per year for 20 years, and then 6% to 7% for 10 years. And this is real growth. Now, China certainly had a lot of advantage by being relatively backward, like Alexander Gerschenkron says. If you are backward, you have more options, because you can stay on, or you can what do you call leap over, leap over. So China did the second. The much credit should go to Deng Xiaoping. When Deng Xiaoping returned to political center and China's power, he visited the United States and Singapore. These two places really changed his mind. Plus, in his early years, during his youth, he spent 6 years in France. So that part certainly set his mindset very, very differently from Mao, for example. Now, he thought the way to rescue China and also rescue the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party after all this mismanagement, right from the beginning of 100 Flowers movement to Cultural Revolution, endless purges, endless political movements, was to change the priority of the state from political correctness to economic correctness, which is allow people to live. So he sets up the goal by year 2000, China's per capita GDP should be 1,000 US per head, and that goal was achieved in 2001. So he was 1 year behind his goal. Now, to do that, he realized China cannot run a closed economy anymore. So opening up is the way to go. So he actually asked overseas Chinese, like my mother's families and relatives to help China by invest in China's economic zones, special economic zones, and B, selling Chinese products worldwide. And in the first 10 years, the main donors of technology and investment came from that group, overseas Chinese. And this is what Russia was lacking. You don't have overseas Russians coming back to help Russia, but you do have a lot of overseas Chinese still having this idea of supporting motherland. By the way, the Russians call the Russia fatherland. We call motherland. To come back from the terrible man-made disasters. My cousins came back from Philippines and United States. They invest in various projects, small projects in Fujian province. Fujian was my maternal ancestral province. Yeah, so but they did their part, and they get reward from the government, profit plus some fancy titles. Yeah. And that went well, and then China was then ready to go all the way, like the tigers, Asian tigers, to basically take orders from all over the world, especially G7 countries, and do things up, selling it back. So this is called export-oriented industrialization. It is a proven effective formula, and China just follow that. So this is really, it would be very surprising if China didn't do it properly. Yeah. So China did it properly, China took off. Yeah. The reason why China achieved that much was because the major change of China's closed economy to China's open export economy. And then you have with this you have problem. China depended too much on export, and also the internal situation at the moment is such that you have a polarization of population in terms of status, like a hukou, and in terms of income. So the internal situation is not as equal, as desirable as when Deng Xiaoping just took over. So China, you have two Chinas: rich coastal China, you have a lot of millionaires, you have a very poshy modern part of China. Then you have inland China, interior China, still struggling. If not Africa, they are certainly not G7. Coast China will be quite close to G7, and interior China will be something between Africa and the Middle East. So you certainly have this huge gap between regions, between social classes, and this we don't have a clear clue how and when such problems will be settled and will be solved. So we do have fast growth, but we do have also the side product of such a growth. So do we call it success in terms of total GDP? Yes. But in terms of social justice, in terms of social welfare, I would say it's not a Pareto optimum. You have a lot of losers in the process, which is not very desirable, unfortunately.
Well, that sort of overlaps with the last question, which is how do you think in the next 10 years China will develop?
Yeah, this is a major challenge for Chinese government, the ruling party, and also the leader, the paramount leader, Xi Jinping. China has two possible choices. One, keep going. The current investment-driven growth may last for another 10 years. May well last for another 10 years. Then you will reach the upper limit with disastrous outcome. For example, you will have housing bubble, you have a stock exchange bubble, you have probably problems with China's foreign exchange, foreign reserves, and also sustainability of your employment population. So that route is so clearly laid out for the decision makers. Will China go on to all the way to that extreme? I would think yes. 50% of chance China will just blindly will go on that way. Another way is reform, to scale down China's export and scale down China's investment overseas, especially China's outbound investment, and try to make the economy more sustainable by restructure the economy, closing a lot of state-owned enterprises, SOEs. They are dinosaurs, very inefficient, and they are unfairly financed by the state. A lot of them should actually go bankrupt straight away. And to promote green economy, for example, make China's economy more environmentally friendly and environmentally sustainable, rather than producing more iron, more steel, more cement, more rolling stocks, more ocean tankers, burn more fossil fuels, and make the world less, the whole ecosystem less sustainable. So this way, China will truly contribute both domestically and globally to humanity. China will have another 50% of chance to go that way in the next 10 years, but this will actually undermine some power of the party state. So simply because if you close down SOEs, the ruling base of the party will be weakened. So this is something the party wouldn't like to see. So there's a political price for China to take the more sensible, more environmentally friendly approach. I'm hoping China will do the latter, simply close all the inefficient, over consuming sectors, stop certain projects such as Belt and Road, and turn more internally. For example, currently China exports 30% of GDP, and 70% of Chinese GDP geared towards export. So it's too open. And why China had to do that? Simply because the internal purchasing power of the general public isn't big enough. Why it isn't big enough? The Chinese total wage bill now counts for about 17% of Chinese GDP. In G7 countries, that figure is 70%. So the gap is threefold. So meaning the Chinese middle class and Chinese waged workers are poorly paid. If we pay them better, China's economy can depend on itself internally rather than exporting. So this requires a lot of changes, as we mentioned earlier, closing down a lot of large companies. These companies are exporting unnecessarily to the rest of the world and paying their workers and the technicians too bad, too low. So again, this will certainly be a challenge to the legitimacy and resource possession of the party. So this requires some political changes in the system, not just exporting sector as well. So everything's linked up to each other, unfortunately. There's no easy way out.
Well, on that note, I hope you will become a major advisor to the Chinese government shortly.
I hope so. Yeah,
and
I hope so.
Guide them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, Alan. Thank you so much.